Ben Hodges is a retired United States Army officer who served as commanding general of the US Army Europe. He now lives in Frankfurt. We meet him in Washington, where he is attending a security conference. General Hodges, it's always great to have you on DW, and I think it's especially great to have you today because there are so many topics we could learn from you, and maybe you can help us understand. We are observing conflicting signals from Europe right now. On the one hand, there's the French President Emmanuel Macron, who said we should send troops to Ukraine to assist in defending against the Russian invasion. On the other hand, there's the German Chancellor who says no. And then the German Chancellor said, or implicated, that there might be already British soldiers on the ground. And of course, the Brits denied. And then we have Vladimir Putin, who says, if you send in troops, you will get a nuclear answer. A lot to sort out. Maybe I start with a simple question. Is German Chancellor Olaf Scholz right when he says there are already British troops on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, of course, I don't know that. If it is true, it's not the place of the German Bundeskanzler to announce it if the British have not announced it. You know, what's missing right now is strategic clarity by the United States, by Germany, by the West on our objective. I mean, what are we trying to accomplish? When we say, well, we're with Ukraine for as long as it takes, or we don't want Ukraine to lose, those are not clear strategic objectives. And so you end up with these nonsensical arguments about that you just described. I thought it was terrific that President Macron said we should not take that off the table. He didn't say we're going to send them. He said we should not take the option off the table, because why would you communicate to your adversary what you won't do? Even if you never intended to do it, why would you say that? So I thought President Macron, what he did was correct. My own president made a mistake back before the beginning of the large-scale invasion when he said no American boots on the ground. Why would you say that? It's not. That's just a gift to the Kremlin, communicating what you won't do.
Right, but obviously Macron didn't talk to other European leaders before he said that. Is this like strategically motivated, or is it just a mistake?
That's a great question, and I don't know why he would have said something like, he could have said French troops, and without having to coordinate it. But clearly, if you're going to say the EU or European troops, something like that, that probably should have been better coordinated with other countries.
Europe is like really sending out all these different signals. How much does this weaken the alliance?
The United States has got to be very, very clear on what its objective is, its expectations of everybody, and then do what the U.S. traditionally has done, which is to make sure we're all coordinated in our efforts, to do the necessary work with allies to make sure that we're in sync on the objectives and the way ahead. And we haven't done that. I mean, other than this famous Ramstein contact group that meets every month, you don't get the feeling that the U.S. administration is doing the necessary work diplomatically for us to remain united. Now, Secretary General Stoltenberg, superb. Admiral Bauer, the chairman of the military committee, superb. General Cavoli, Supreme Allied Commander, superb. But the nations do seem disjointed. And I think, to be candid, unfortunately, the German Bundeskanzler seems the one that is the most out of step with everybody else. It must be really painful for him to be having to do things he's doing now, providing aid to Ukraine, building up the Bundeswehr, different from what he ever imagined he would be doing when he was a younger politician. But it's essential. I mean, Germany, the most prosperous, richest country in Europe, the massive industrial capacity, has got to help guide. Otherwise, if Ukraine fails, we're going to be in a terrible conflict with Russia in Europe, and Germany is going to pay a massive price. The thing they always wanted to avoid is coming back.
But we have to be fair with the German Chancellor. There was this Zeitenwende-Rede, and they're really like increasing the spending in the military budget?
Absolutely. That's what's so confusing, is because 2 years ago it was like, Zeitenwende, 100 billion euros, and then even the other day, he's out there breaking ground for an ammunition factory. Another thing I'm sure he never imagined he would do. These are all good, positive steps. Germany agreeing to a Brigada Litauen by 2027. These are very powerful, strong signals. But then on the other hand, here in just the last few days, he's undone or damaged this sense of Germany really leaning forward with the almost panicky statement, like, we're not going to put troops on the ground, and the absolute refusal to provide Taurus. Very, very clearly, no way we're going to do that, which I think is unfortunate, because that would really be helpful to Ukraine.
Would you think it would make sense sending troops into Ukraine?
Not without having clearly defined the objective. What is the purpose? This is a mistake we all make too many times, is send troops, send things, send money, but for what end? And that's the hardest thing for our political leaders to do, to clearly define the strategic objective. What are you trying to accomplish? And if you have a clearly defined objective and you're sticking with that, then you can come up with policy that makes sense. We don't have the clearly defined objective yet. So if I was an American soldier or a German Bundeswehr, I'd like, okay, so what is my purpose here? I'm not against going, but what am I supposed to accomplish?
But you say one should keep this option absolutely on the table.
Of course. Make the Russians worry about it. Give them problems to worry about instead of reducing their problems.
Vladimir Putin was very clear. He said, if you send in troops, I will give you a nuclear answer. How serious is this threat?
Zero. This is what Russia does because they see how easily rattled we are when they talk about they might use a nuclear weapon. We have been deterring ourselves for years just because somebody says, oh, we might move a nuclear weapon into Belarus, which does nothing to improve the nuke or increase the chances of it being used, but just by making that announcement, that becomes a topic for days and days. Or the other day, oh, Russia might be putting a nuclear weapon in space. Okay, everybody, that's all they can talk about. And so the Kremlin sees how easily we deter ourselves. And so when I try to think practically, all right, what would they do? There are no positive outcomes for Russia if they use a nuclear weapon. Zero. Nothing. There's nothing that they could destroy that would win the war for them or make things better. It'd be the opposite. President Biden said to use a nuclear weapon, catastrophic consequences for Russia. China has said, do not use a nuclear weapon. And so I think the Russians realize that their nuclear weapons are most effective when they don't actually use them. They just talk about them. And it's amazing to me that we continue to fall for this bullying threat.
So you basically say ignoring is the best answer?
I would double down on what is our objective. Say, we're not going to be deterred by these threats. We're on the right side here. We're protecting the UN Charter. We are protecting sovereignty. You go down why Ukraine matters to all of us. That this is not some charity case over in Eastern Europe. This affects Europe's security and prosperity, which affects us. The Chinese obviously are watching. So, number one, make it very clear what our objective is. Number two, say, we have thousands of nuclear weapons. So don't come to me with your empty threat. And then we make it clear that our objective is for Ukraine to win, and we give them what they need to win.
I would like to move to that question exactly. So you're very well connected around the world, but also with people in Ukraine. The conflict appears to be at a still stand. Do you believe that that Ukraine still can win this war, and how so?
I absolutely believe that Ukraine can win and that it's important that they win. And win means eject Russia back to the 1991 border. Of course, for that to happen, it's going to take American and German leadership and support for that to happen. This thing could have been in a much different place months ago if we had committed to helping them win instead of what we're doing.
What would they need to overpower Russia?
All right, well, there's probably three sort of different capabilities come to mind immediately. And there is no one wonder weapon, there is no one thing that's a complete game changer, okay? But obviously the capabilities they need are to make Crimea untenable for the Russian forces. So that means long-range precision weapons, and there's different types, that could hit every part of the Navy base, air bases, logistics, headquarters in Crimea. And there's nowhere to hide there. So we know where everything is in Crimea. The Ukrainians just need the ability to hit that, make it untenable. That's the most important piece of ground of Russian-occupied Ukraine, number one. Number two, the way you neutralize Russia's mass, their advantage of numbers, is with precision. Knock out headquarters, knock out artillery, knock out logistics. If you do those, then these huge numbers of untrained cannon fodder that they bring, much less effective. So again, that means you need long-range precision weapons. And every square meter of Russian-occupied Ukraine is inside 300 kilometers. So that Taurus, ATACMS, other weapon systems like that would be very effective.
How long can this war go on before the West and the Western countries get tired?
Well, of course, I'm glad you asked that, because we have zero reason to get tired. I mean, not one American soldier or German Bundeswehr soldier has even broken a fingernail. So, I mean, what are we tired of? We should be tired of the failure of our political leaders to explain what's the objective and why this matters. The Ukrainians, of course, have reason to be tired, but everything that I see and hear from Ukrainians with whom I speak, they can't stop, because they know what happens in Ukrainian villages when the Russians show up. Ukrainians do have to fix their personnel system. They've got over 2 million women and men that are military age, but tens of thousands of them are in Germany, Poland, Romania, Baltic countries. They're not attracted to military service. There are tens of thousands that are in Ukraine that are not in the military. So, and the average age of Ukrainian soldiers is like over 40. It's incredible. So this is a political decision. The government has got to get serious. Otherwise, not only do they risk all of their units being attrited terribly, and soldiers becoming exhausted because there's no rotation, but also I worry that some nations will begin to be less willing to support Ukraine if Ukrainians are not even fully committed themselves.
Talking about governments, I think we have to turn our attention briefly to the situation in Washington. You are well connected to lawmakers from both sides, from both political parties. Do you think they will reach an agreement on a new Ukraine bill?
Members of Congress, including the majority of Republicans, actually support this. So now this is a real test for Speaker Johnson, that he is able to withstand pressure from Trump, or do enough Republicans decide to vote with Democrats using one of the parliamentary procedures that would allow them to have a vote on the floor. So this is, unfortunately, American domestic politics is playing out in front of the whole world. It's ugly and totally unnecessary. And I think it not only gives Russia an advantage for a period of time, but it also will cause our allies to think, what the hell is wrong with the United States?
Talking about Trump, I think we have to address this briefly. He is threatening to withdraw from NATO, or at least drastically reduce the US support if he would be re-elected. How dangerous is this? How dangerous is this not only for NATO but also for the US itself?
Well, of course, another Trump presidency would be bad news for our democracy. It would be bad news for how other nations view us as a good example of a liberal democratic country. But in practical terms, it's dangerous when he encourages Vladimir Putin to do, quote, whatever the hell he wants to a NATO country that is not investing enough into their own defense. A remarkable degree of strategic illiteracy. When he says things like that, that's a signal to the Kremlin that, okay, the cohesion of the alliance, which has always been the glue, what made NATO so strong and what successfully deterred the Soviet Union for decades and now Russia.
Donald Trump has an interesting relationship with Vladimir Putin. Do you think it's possible that he would, once in office, sacrifice Ukraine?
I think given his transactional nature, I believe it is possible. I think that, when Trump says, I can solve this in 24 hours, well, of course, what he's talking about is that he tells Vladimir Putin, hey, look, you pull out, let's get an agreement, and I'll make sure Ukraine never gets into NATO, for example. Things like that. Or you can have Ukraine, but you're going to have to do something else over here. I think that Mr. Trump does not care about 2%. I don't think he wants to be encumbered by an alliance where he has to get agreement with 30 or 31 other nations, soon to be 31. Instead, I think he sees himself like an 18th century ruler, him, Xi, and Putin, and they're the ones that kind of figure it all out. I think that's what he really wants. The 2% thing is just a weapon that he uses.
My last question is, Donald Trump repeatedly says, with him in the White House, Putin would not have invaded Ukraine and there would be no war in the Middle East.
There's zero evidence to support that. In the Middle East, I think that we have got to think more strategically to recognize that Iran is Russia's best ally, and Russia is Iran's best ally. And I don't think that the attack on October the 7th by Hamas was a coincidence. I think that this is part of Iran taking advantage of an opportunity, doing something that helps Putin, because surely the Palestinians were not helped, the Russians were helped.
Explain why the attack helped Russia.
Well, it diverted attention and resources immediately. I mean, literally ammunition, things that would have been going to Ukraine immediately were shifted to Israel. And it creates a massive political problem for President Biden also. I mean, as you know, here at home, we've got challenges with people unhappy with American support for Israel. This is a big problem. And now this is all held up. The Ukraine aid bill is tied to Israel, to Taiwan, and the border. So this disruptive effect, as well as literally a diversion of resources away from Ukraine, helps Russia.
General Hodges, thank you so much.
Thank you for the privilege.
Vielen Dank.
Es freut mich sehr.